Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we're going to be diving into Foundry orientation. Have you ever wondered how to approach a system like Foundry? Does it feel like you're drinking from a fire hose when you do? That's alright, it does for me too. But I've learned a lot over the last month or so messing around with Foundry, and I believe I have, some insights to share on how I would approach scaling an organization around Foundry, how I would approach scaling engineering teams around Foundry, and the application architectures and automation I'm going to need to extend Foundry. So this isn't, straight from Palantir. This is not their best practice, but it's what I've learned from hands-on Foundry usage over the last month. So get ready, people, for Foundry orientation. All right, let's take a look now at what I call the Foundry layer cake. And this is a good way to orient yourself both to the different parts of Foundry and then the type of person that will be working in that layer and what they will be doing within that layer. So Foundry is first and foremost, it's all founded on a security first approach, right? So what that means is you're going to need a good DevSecOps lead to work with your data connections in Foundry. And within Foundry, you can add new data sources. This is under the data connections menu item. You can add new data sources by clicking on this type of source you would like to add. This is not a complete list. This is just what came with my instance. So you can see there's a whole lot just in my instance. Probably the easiest data source to get started with is S3. Very easy to hook up an S3 bucket. REST APIs, like generic REST API integrations, are a little bit trickier, but a supported API is super easy. So if you see a supported API in here you want to use, great. You could jump into Google Analytics even and connect it. But the most common way companies choose to connect all these data sources is via their agent, there's a data connection agent that you install, which is like a container service that you run inside your network. And that's where this domain lead of DevSecOps really comes in handy, is that they can install that agent for you, configure all the necessary security, report back to your CTO or CIO, whoever they're reporting to, on the security model that's implemented for all these various data sources you're going to connect. And if you invest in doing that up front, right, everything else downstream is much easier. So remember, Foundry, first and foremost, it's a security first platform. You're going to need someone from DevSecOps to configure your data connections, and probably the way they're going to choose to do that is, again, with that data connection client. And if you even come in here to S3, for example, you can see that the recommended option for all of these is going to be using that data connection agent. I can leave links in the documentation on how to install that agent, but you can also find it on the public docs and also under help and support. So if you were to go over to the help and support section, you can go into the documentation and you can search, I believe it's data connection client. And there you go. And so let's just go to the overview. You can see that it'll have a whole overview about this client and the general architecture that it uses. Okay. So the first layer of Foundry is security, and that deals with data connections. And the best way to configure all of the supported data sources is to use this data connection client that's configured in your network and is set to sync up with Foundry. So that's what I recommend there. And this domain lead of DevSecOps is a true subject matter expert, right? This is not a junior role. This should be an SME in your DevSecOps, knows how to work with containers, knows how to configure data connection clients. By the way, a data connection client is not unusual. Amazon has them, Azure has them. So they should be well versed in setting up this kind of access and following through on the security model that your CTO or CIO wants to see. So that's layer one. All right, so the next layer to look at is the data engineering layer in Foundry. And this is my absolute favorite layer of the app. It's the most robust in my opinion. They gave you all of the tools you're going to need to extract value from this insane amount of disparate data sources. And keep in mind, like the average company now, 70% of your data or 70% of your software is now SaaS, which means 70% of your data is now sitting in these siloed SaaS applications out there. And Palantir gives you an amazing array of tools to essentially model, like ingest, transform, and model that data into a form that can allow you to derive business value. And so the first thing to look at, the sort of base layer, the very bottom of that stack, is the code repositories, in my opinion. There is a visual tool called Contour, which you can see if we go over to the menu, you'll see it here. And it allows you to visualize these larger data sets. You can actually perform joins and create pipelines out of a Contour project. So it's definitely for non-technical users, you can use it, which is actually really powerful. Like if you want to, like say you're just an independent team and you don't have an engineer on your team, but you want to pull together some data from different data sources, Contour is a great way to do it. And you can actually export, I believe, Contour projects to a code repository. So if you eventually want to turn it into code that engineers can work on, you can. So that's really cool. But that's a good option if you're non-technical. But if you are technical and you have data engineers, the code repositories are your best friend. What's cool about code repositories is you can see each of these becomes a step in the pipeline. And you can see here that I'm ingesting from a raw input source, and my output is a data set. And that's how every pipeline works in Foundry. You're going to have an input and an output. And you can actually have multiple inputs and multiple outputs. So you absolutely can have multiple in here. And this is all, the Transform API is part of Foundry. There is a way to work locally with this code, by the way. So there is a way in which you can work locally, but you're using mock data. So if you want to come in here and check out this code base, you can. There is a link to clone the repo, and you can check it out locally. Just keep in mind you're going to have to work with the mock tools locally. You won't be able to work with the actual production data. The whole thing has its own version control system built in. So like if you want to create a feature branch, you can go to branches, you can create a new branch, you can do pull request review in here. There are all kinds of pull requests. They have their own Git implementation. This is not GitHub. It's fully secure. You have branch protections as well. So if you come into branch protections, you can set those up. Which I enabled, which I don't want people committing directly to master. So all the tools you would expect in like a full-on version control system are built into Foundry with the CI/CD pipeline, right? So when you merge to master, those changes are automatically built and deployed based on your build schedule. So you can configure build scheduling in the build schedule tools or in the data lineage tool, which I'll show you in a second. So in here, you could also write tests for your pipeline. So as you're writing your Spark transforms, maybe a more interesting transform is this one. You can go ahead and write tests. Let me go ahead and close that to verify that your transform is doing what you want it to do, and all your tests will be under your test directory in the exact same name, like folder structure, as your source code, and you can put your tests in there. And those will automatically be run on each build. So you don't have to worry about configuring any of that. It's all pre-built for you. Just go ahead and put your tests in there. And I love that about code repositories in Foundry. It's like literally a production grade, ready to go, full, complete CI/CD pipeline. And check this out. One of the coolest things is that you can switch between branches at any point in Foundry, right? If I wanted to come over here and check out a different branch, I can. But another cool thing is if we explore the data lineage, so this is Foundry's data lineage tool, which is also part of their data engineering tools. I can see the history of how this data set came to be all the way back to the data source. And if I want to see the code that actually produced that, I can come in here and just check out the code that's in my code repository. But one of the other cool things is I can switch between branches. So if I'm working on a feature branch that's unreleased, I can switch at any point in the data engineering tool sets to another feature branch. I mean, how freaking cool is that? I just continually geek out on that. I freaking love it. And you can actually see the data lineage, and this is my actual clean events data set from my pipeline that I created in the code repositories, which eventually output an ontology object. And that's what all code pipelines do in Foundry, is eventually you output an ontology. Now mine is simple. I'm only combining one data set into an ontology, but often you'll have really complicated pipelines that combine a whole bunch of different data sets and then reduce them down into an ontology object. And we'll get into data modeling in the next layer, but I just want you guys to understand that code pipelines build ontology objects, which then power applications, right? So this is the bottom of the barrel, the base layer foundation for delivering value with Foundry are code repositories, in my opinion. You can also do health checks. Data health is a super important and often overlooked aspect of data pipelines. They give you an incredibly robust system for configuring data health checks, custom data health checks. You can check out their video on data health checks on the Palantir developers channel on YouTube, or check out my first Foundry for Gaming video. I demo health checks, so you guys could check that out. Or it might be a Foundry in action. I think it's a Foundry in action video on code repositories where I demo that. So you can check that out. But absolutely, I mean, Palantir did it just phenomenal job building, like, to me, like, premier platform. The other really cool thing here is all the Spark details are hidden from you, but you have full access to them, including the partitioning structure. So if you want to repartition your data under a custom structure, you absolutely can. You can view the Spark execution graph for each build. You can optimize your Spark queries. You can have as much access or as little access as you want to Spark. And to me, I think that's just a godsend, because, like, I don't want engineers messing with Spark. Like, just use same defaults, come in here, write the transforms, and we're good to go. Whereas, like, a lot of the time, like, the whole maintenance of the MapReduce cluster, like with Amazon, like if you're using Amazon, I believe I think it's Elastic MapReduce, or they have a service for running Spark jobs. But the whole maintenance is on you. It's not really a truly managed service, in my opinion. You're still stuck managing a lot of the details, and also, like, the job management system sucks. So a lot, like, you might install Yarn or some other process manager for Spark to submit jobs, and that's all on you as well. So having this just completely done for you in a best practice way, end to end, with health checks, with unit tests, with version control, like the whole thing, soup to nuts. I mean, dude, this is where to me, this is where Palantir just absolutely hit it out of the park. So some of the best data engineering tools, in my opinion, you're going to see, all under one platform, all designed with best practice in mind, and to allow you to have your engineers start delivering value on day zero at lightning speed. All right, so the next layer we're going to look at is the data modeling layer. And this is where the ontology comes in, and they're also their graph capabilities with Vertex and their Object Explorer, which I kind of think of the Object Explorer as a combination of, like, feature store meets, like, data warehouse. And you'll see why in a second, because ontology objects can be used to feed models. You can bind a model's inputs to an ontology object and its outputs, I believe, as well. So it's kind of like a feature store in a way, the Object Explorer. So you can come in, you can search for different parts of your data and kind of get to know what's in your available data sets, or your ontology objects, sorry. But this layer is, like, absolutely critical to get right. Everything downstream of the ontology is like, all of the value you're going to extract from Foundry for your operators and your business users is downstream of the ontology. All your apps that you use, like, all the value you're going to build for your organization is going to be built on this ontology. And if you get it wrong, you're really screwed. Luckily, there's a versioning system in the ontology manager that lets you cleanly release new versions of these objects without breaking downstream functionality. There's whole sections in the docs that relate to this. So, you know, if you want to learn more about the versioning system, by all means, explore the documentation online. I'm not going to get into it. But if we come into, let's go back to our Object Explorer and take a look at, I believe they call this application Monocle. If we go into Monocle and we look at the ontology object that my data pipeline produces, you can see that there's going to be a whole list of properties in here about what's on the object. And if you want to, you can go and explore this. I believe it's under Actions. I think if I go to View Objects, it'll take me into the Object Explorer. Yep. So we can come into the Object Explorer, and it'll show me the definition of this object, right? And they can show you just various stats on the different properties and whatnot. So, you know, you can go in there and check it out. This is, I think, what we want to do is, I think, go into the edit mode. Let's go. Maybe it's open in. Nah, I'm going to go to the object. Let's just go to the ontology manager. And this is where you, like, configure everything, right? So if you want to edit an object or create a new one, that's what you're going to do. You're going to come in here and do that. You can see all of the properties of this object. If I come into the edit mode, you can see the data source and how all of the properties are mapped, and see a preview of that data from the data source, right? So this is a super powerful tool. I'm not going to edit this because I'm actually using it in my Quiver analysis, but you can edit it and you can release a version of it, right? So but your applications can still use the backward versions, the deprecated versions, and it does have a deprecation capability. So, like, if I'm going to edit the ontology object in some way, either through my pipelines or through direct edit, one of the cool things that you can do is deprecate the old version and release a new one, and that allows all of your teams downstream to start updating their applications. So that's a really cool feature of the ontology manager. The other thing that's cool is the capabilities. So you can see all the various capabilities these things can have, which is pretty crazy. Like, they can dispatch events. You have built-in eventing. It's pretty cool. And so there's time series data. There's vertex, which is the graph view of the data. I think I can probably jump into a graph view in a minute through the Object Explorer. But it's really cool to be able to visualize, to see all the capabilities that these things can have. And they also have write-back capabilities. So this application called Phonograph is responsible for handling mutations in ontology objects, and they can notify things downstream that need to be notified whenever a value changes in your ontology. And you can write back to data sources, you can trigger custom functions, you can invoke webhooks, you can do all kinds of really cool stuff. I will be demoing in my next Foundry for Gaming video how to use a custom function to invoke a webhook whenever something changes in your ontology object. So that's really cool. So an ontology system is super robust. If we go back to the Object Explorer, let me see if I can find Object Explorer, because I think the Object Explorer has a graph view of these objects. Let me see if I can find a graph. Yeah. So if you go to the graph view, you can see the whole thing and all the vertices that connect it, which is really, really cool in my opinion. And you can also view the relationship. You can see the relationship types, right? So that's really cool. You can like see the details in here. See, it's a one-to-one relationship, and I'm not sure of all the options you have when modeling the vertices, if you can attach behaviors to a vertices or anything like that. So, or if you can attach a knowledge graph. I haven't asked them if they support knowledge graphs similar to Neo4j. So that's something to look into in the documentation. It'd be really cool if they do support knowledge graphs. So anyway, that's something though to check out with the docs. But this is really cool, and it's a great way to discover your data. You can search for objects and properties. So if you're in machine learning or you're an analyst, you're going to be spending a lot of time in here doing that. And then you can build apps directly off of these things too. So like, say you're just starting a new project, maybe you're a data scientist, you can absolutely come in here, start exploring the data, figure out like the data you want to pull together, and then go ahead and incorporate those into a new data science project, which you'd probably most likely do with the modeling objectives here. I highly recommend using modeling objectives as your way to start new data science and data analysts or like data engineering initiatives or data science initiatives, because it forces you to answer like business questions. So that's one of the coolest things they did with their modeling objectives program. I'm getting a little off track, I know, but it's really cool to understand that like from the ontology layer, you start actually building value with the applications. And we're going to get into the applications layer next. I just want everyone to understand this is a super robust layer. It has versioning, it has graphs, it has write-back capabilities, it has eventing, like everything you would want from a foundational data mesh. Like this it's all there for you. But again, I actually really recommend your CTO and your CIO and your domain lead for data science spend a lot of time modeling your ontology, because if you get it wrong, you're going to create a lot of churn for yourself downstream when you go and try to build apps on top of this thing. Yes, you can deprecate versions, you can change it, but again, like you want to avoid as much of that as possible, just because it creates a lot of work for your teams downstream. So get your CTO, get your CIO, get your domain lead for data science, understand your organization's data and the future needs of your data, and try to model that into a flexible ontology that can really provide value, and also allow your teams to then consume that in ways you may not have thought of through this Object Explorer. Set your permissions accordingly, but you can allow your teams to do some pretty robust stuff directly from the ontology layer and create new apps that you hadn't necessarily envisioned. So focus on the data and not the apps downstream. Just focus on, does this accurately represent my org in the real world? All right, so the last layer we're going to look at here is the applications layer. And this is where, again, all the value gets delivered, right? So whether you're talking about machine learning initiatives or data analyst, initiatives, full-blown custom applications that you traditionally would have built in technologies like Angular or React, that's all covered by Workshop. This is where all the fun begins. There is a host of these things, too, to do basically anything. So if we come over to the main menu here, let's go back. We can look at Quiver. That's the one I'm using the most right now, and I have an actual dashboard that I publish through Quiver. So if we look at that, you can see what's possible in just Quiver alone. And all you do when you're doing these Quiver analysis is you hook them up to a data source or an ontology object that was produced by your data pipelines, and then they give you all these like really cool visual tools to then model that data including things like do date range selection. Like all the tools you would expect to see in something like a Tableau are all here. They're just better. They're more modern. They're super responsive. They have liquid layouts by default. It's really, really cool. And you can publish your findings as a dashboard and govern them under a different security model right out of the box. You don't have to worry about spinning up clusters or any of this other crap. And it's all governed under the same security model built into Foundry. So you get this unified experience. So like when you set security permissions in Foundry, they follow you all the way from the data source all the way out to these application analyses. So like there is no additional security layer you have to build in. It's all end to end. Now, I don't know who else can do that. To me, their data governance is just unbeatable, like unfucking beatable. So just understand you will have like the absolute best data governance by default to allow your users to only see the data they have access to in the ways you want them to see that data and have access to it under what terms and conditions. All of that is built in. But as you can see here, I built a pretty robust little dashboard. Check out my Foundry for Gaming video, the latest update I did, which I published a few weeks ago, and to see a full explanation of how all of this works. I'm not going to get into it here. But this is just one app, right? So that's just to build quiver analyses. But you also have a tool like Workshop. Workshop is a full-blown like application framework, right? It's all visual drag and drop, but there's also the ability for you to write custom code in Workshop. So if you're like a React engineer, you're going to be right at home writing custom code to help augment Workshop. And you can actually do things in Workshop. So like Workshop is a lot like Quiver, but it has things like alerting capabilities built in. You want to trigger an alert, you can. You want to write back to data, you can. You can actually build editable forms of these dashboards that trigger like right back into an ERP system, which could trigger an ordering of a part, for example. A really good example of what's possible with Workshop is Skywise. So like if you look at tools like Skywise or Palantir's HyperAuto, they actually built that on top of Foundry using tools like Workshop. So they eat their own dog food. They're building enterprise-grade applications for their customers on top of these tools. It's not like you get this crappy version and they have this, better version. They absolutely eat their own dog food. They make full-blown apps on top of this. To give you an idea of how flexible this is, Logan from Palantir did a video recently on building a Kanban board with Workshop. So you want to replace, Atlassian products? By all means. And guess what? If you do that, not only are those applications shareable, that's the other cool thing, I can package everything that makes up an application from the data pipelines all the way out to these analyses and actual full-blown apps that do stuff as a Foundry template, right? And see my video on Foundry templates for a demo of that. But you could build like third-party apps in here. This is the thing that is blowing my mind about Foundry, is that there will absolutely one day, in my opinion, be a marketplace to resell apps you build for Foundry, because you can build almost anything on it, dude. Like, I'm not kidding when I say you could eliminate Atlassian. You could build a much better version of agile software tools in Foundry and distribute those. Why is it a better version? Because all of the fucking data is now available to everyone, right? There's no integration work you have to do to get your data out of Jira into your data warehouse so people can fucking ask basic questions about it. It's all sitting in Foundry now, right? You can absolutely model ticket objects. You can create all different kinds of data models and then visualize them in their tools. And like Logan's demo, you can see where he made a drag and drop Kanban board. That's fucking cool. And because these things can trigger actions, if you want to integrate it with the version control system, open a feature branch, close a feature branch, all doable directly within Foundry. So this kind of thing, this is the future, people. Every SaaS app you use today, in my opinion, almost every single one of them, will be rewritten as a data app that is going to be running either on top of Foundry, on top of Databricks, or on top of Snowflake. All of them now have these capabilities to build apps directly on top of the data warehouse, and this has become known as data apps. Andreessen Horowitz is forecasting this back in 2021. Other people such as myself have been forecasting this for a long time now. But this is the future of SaaS. We are going to rebuild every app using tools like this that these providers, Palantir, Databricks, and Snowflake, are providing to build data apps that will replace your traditional SaaS applications. So as an organization, what you should be thinking about when you're looking at the application tools in Foundry is, what SaaS products can I replace by using tools like Workshop, using tools like Quiver? We also have reports. I mean, I wouldn't use reports probably because I think you can probably do just about anything, and you could do in reports, you can probably do in Quiver. There's also Fusion, which is like an Excel interface for this stuff. There's preparation if you want to clean up and format data. These are all visual tools for you to build applications that deliver business value. And this isn't a complete listing, by the way. What I also like is there's things like Notepad, which replace Google Docs, and Forms, which replace Google Forms. So Imagine getting all of your fucking data as an organization into a format now that's mineable and discoverable. Like one of the biggest problems with today's organization is that 80% of your data is unstructured and untapped because it's sitting in things like Slack, it's sitting in things like Google Docs, it's sitting in things like Atlassian. Like it's either in some non-structured or semi-structured form and it's hard to get at. Well, by building all of your apps on top of Foundry and bringing your whole organization into the application layer of Foundry, now all of your data is automatically indexed and discoverable. Think about what you could learn about your organization doing that. That's a true digital twin. This isn't possible any other way, in my opinion, either. Like, I don't think there's another way to really create a digital twin of your org. You will be spending all of your time integrating and aggregating data together unless you actually build the apps your organization uses on top of the data warehouse. And that's what Palantir has by far and away built the most robust platform. In my opinion, the nearest competitor to them, probably Snowflake, is to do this a decade away, from being able to get to a point where Palantir is at with their capabilities. So it's, in my opinion, this is just unmatched. There is no, the next best option is like orders of magnitude worse than this, right? So like Foundry is the premier platform. It is the big data OS. And because of this application layer, organizations can truly build a digital twin and basically move everyone out of these old, SaaS products that silo all your data into custom bespoke apps built specifically for their org and their use case on top of the data warehouse, or import a third-party tool as a template. And I really hope to see one day a marketplace to power that. So lots to discover here. I encourage you that all the docs for these apps are published online, and I'll leave a link to the documentation. So if you want to learn more about Quiver, by all means, read the docs. The Palantir developer channel is a great place to learn about Quiver and Workshop. Logan did a fantastic hour-long demo of Workshop where he demonstrates building this Kanban board. I think it's a great primer if you want to learn more about it. And by the way, this is absolutely going to displace a lot of engineering teams. If you're sick of dealing with engineers building, internal tools all the time, and the delays and the time it takes, imagine working in a platform where you're the engineer and you have the visual tools, and you don't need someone else to come in and build the dashboard or build the system that will go and trigger an order or alert someone about something. This is all tools that you can just build as a non-technical user visually directly in Foundry. Think about what that means for your organization. To me, I think that's like the engineering bottleneck that I keep talking about on my channel is removed. We can move at the speed of the data stream because we're not bottlenecking in engineering every time we want to ask a new question or do something with the data. I now, as the business owner or the operator, I can go ahead and build those tools. It does require training, but not very much. Like I was able to get up to running with these tools without even reading the docs. That's just because I'm used to dealing with things like this. But if you go through the training, go through the Foundry 101 demos and stuff, by the way, the platform does come with a whole, help integrated support. So you can go into, I believe it's help and support. There's documentation, but there's also this Foundry Academy. The Foundry Academy has like videos and tutorials that help you understand all of these tools. So you can like jump in there and see, and they're basically done for each, like this is app development. That there's different sections that relate to different layers in this layer cake I'm showing you. There's data engineering, and they all go like 01, 02, 03. These are ascending in terms of complexity. So there's great info in here if you need it to get up and running. But anyway, applications are incredible, super robust. They are where all the value is going to be created and shipped. They allow you to remove the engineering bottleneck, and in my opinion, especially due to the template feature, the fact that I could like distribute custom built solutions all the way down to the data pipeline, all the way up to the application layer, that's going to completely change the game in SaaS, in my opinion. All right, so one last thing before the end of this video, I want to leave a link to the platform overview and the documentation. But this is a really good way when you're sitting there going, well, what are the apps we're going to build on Foundry? Like, what do we actually build with it? There's lots of great info in here. And also, like, they have this thing called use case patterns, which are like abstract patterns, which then get applied in these use case examples. And this is a really good way, like this drive revenue with integrated pricing. This is like a example of a use case pattern adopted for sales and marketing teams to get quotes out the door, right? So like that's actually really cool. And so what you can do is you can go through these example use cases, then read about the use case pattern that underlies them, and that'll get your brain thinking about like, well, how do I apply Foundry in my org? What are the apps that I can build in my org? definitely read these. Your brain will be spinning. If you're a business owner, this should speak directly to you. You do not have to be technical at all. Key decision makers, this is for you. So start reading these and then learn about the use case pattern that underlies the use case example, and you'll have a really good idea of the types of apps you can build on Foundry and what your org can start building as it rolls out and adopts Foundry. There you have it. First episode of Foundry Orientation is in the books. In the next episode, we're going to dive into application architecture. Foundry is amazing. It has a complete set of APIs for you to integrate apps on top of. But there are nuances here to building high concurrent, low latency applications that generally need to be ultra performant for SEO reasons and for lots of other reasons. So I'm going to dive into my architectures, what I recommend, what I'm building. Spoiler alert, it looks a lot like CQRS with eventing, but next episode we're going to dive into application architecture. So I hope you got a lot out of this if you're an organization looking to adopt Foundry, and stay tuned.